Thank you for joining today's Teaching with Technology Brown Bag session, Your Images But Better, Tips for Working with Graphics. Our presenters today are Ms. Simone Faree, Mr. Brandon Henry, and Mr. Michael Gallagher from the ETI. To start us off for today's session is Ms. Faree.
If you all took time out of your busy schedule to check out a presentation that's called Your Images But Better, you're probably using already, or at least thinking about using images in some way for healthcare education because you're teaching students, or you're doing professional development for your colleagues, or patient education perhaps, or some other use of images. So since there's a range of reasons of how and why we are all using images, you might want to be doing it because you're illustrating content, simplifying communication of complex ideas. Maybe you want to generate more interest in the ideas you're already presenting, or you might have another reason. First of all, I'm going to talk about how you can use the tools that you already have in PowerPoint or Google Slides to use cropping, resizing, labeling, outlining to take images that are in the public domain or that ETI has worked with you to create and make them better. And for the cases when you can't find those kind of images you have the rights to use, Brandon is going to discuss how to use Google Gemini for image generation. And then Mike will cover some basic image enhancement tips in Photoshop. But first, let's have another little discussion about this slide and image here. It's something we created uniquely for this presentation, but it has some of the issues that we frequently see here at the ETI when we look at slides. How effectively you think this slide communicates and maybe how we might make it better. Let's look at this a little more closely. But first, there's something also we want to show you that we see a lot when we look at recorded lectures. In an image like this, sometimes the presenter wants to show something specific, like maybe the synaptic vesicle. So they'll take their cursor and they'll start circling around it as they talk about it. Now, the problem with this is that your eye is kind of tracking all around that arrow and you don't see what the arrow is actually surrounding very clearly. Even if you're using a bigger arrow or maybe a brighter arrow, it's still difficult to track on what the arrow is trying to indicate. So we're going to offer you some better tools to highlight something that we want to talk about. So we've talked about benefits of what the right image can do. Also a little bit about how wrong images can be detrimental to what you want to communicate. We're going to talk just briefly, quick refresher about some of the educational theories behind what can make images better or worse. I've already mentioned cognitive load theory, where the demands placed on a person by the mental work or cognitive load are greater than the person's mental abilities to process it, which leads to a state called cognitive overload, which we want to avoid at all costs. So it's important that we remove those extraneous elements of information wherever possible. Signaling is where you use on-screen text or symbols or other graphic elements to highlight important components of the image. And this saves the learner time and distraction by not having to scan all over an image to try to figure out what is being referenced. And it also helps to emphasize organization and connection of the information. And lastly, something called zooming, which is also known as elaboration theory. And this is where you zoom into one component or out to show a bigger picture and how that one component relates to the whole. So now let's get into the actual tools in Google Slide and PowerPoint. Following images are public domain or were created by the ETI because we always respect copyright and make sure that we are complying with it. And the tools I'm going to mention are both in PowerPoint and Google Slides. Sometimes they're located in a little different place or called something slightly different, but they're all available to you in both of those software programs. Lines are very effective to enhance images, and thoughtfully placed ones can do a lot to help the learner focus on what's important. And so they're an easy way to apply that theory that we mentioned called signaling. And when you make your lines, you're going to use colors that are easy to see and have high contrast and bold, which is a good practice in general for everyone, and also in particular for those who might be colorblind or don't see the full color spectrum. One common way to use lines is to make an outline for part or all of an image to focus the learner's attention and signal about something. An additional benefit to outlining for those who are presenting is that you don't have to fumble around with that mouse trying to encircle the thing you're talking about. The outline makes it very clear. However, Some of the prepackaged outline shapes are not as effective as others. Sometimes you have a graphic like this, which is from a previous brown bag about infographics. The shape is a little more complicated than that square, rectangle, or circle. In this case, it's 170 years old, and it has these colors that are kind of hard to differentiate. What is preventable disease, other causes, or wounds? The circle definitely not optimal about what I'm trying to target here if I'm talking about this. I want the learner to see clearly how much smaller the area for wounds and other causes of mortality were than the preventable diseases in the Crimean War. You'll notice that red outline wasn't there in the beginning. It popped on as I started to reference it, and that's another way to manage cognitive load. It's not only what you show, but when you show it. When they appears when I'm talking about them, it helps you focus your attention better. And if I show it before I talk about it, then you're spending some cognitive time trying to process what that is before I've even explained it. So we do this through the animation tool, which is available in both slides in PowerPoint. But the outline could be a lot more effective if you took a little more time, as you'll see in the next slide, to use the line tool and make multiple lines. And then you know exactly the area that I want you to look at. So that was, yes, a little bit more effort, but not much for a much more effective graphic. Next, we want to talk about arrows, which are another very useful tool that can enhance your image, and using animation to time them really helps as well. Using that color that contrasts with the image. Now, red is often a good choice, but not always, depending on your image. So we're going to show you now an image that our medical illustrator, Michael Gallagher, created. You'll be hearing from him soon. As some of you already know, this image depicts the three regions of the pharynx, the nasopharynx, oropharynx, and the hypopharynx. And in this case, because there's red already, we couldn't use red, and something too light wouldn't stand up against the spine. So in this case, the black was the best compound. We need our arrows to point right from the label to the item, and it should take the shortest path possible through that image so it doesn't obscure anything else. It should start outside the image, and that helps draw more attention to the item in the image you want. Cropping helps present the part of the image you want them to focus on and remove extraneous information that can distract them and cause cognitive overload. Cropping is also a good tool for that zooming in and out that we talked about that helps them see interrelationships. And the cropping tool is not only available in PowerPoint and Google Slides, but in Photoshop as well, which Mike will show you. Now let's look at a few examples to see how effective cropping can be. So in this first one, this was for a brown bag on microlearning, and we wanted to get the audience engaged. So we're going to have them answer some questions in the chat to start thinking about whether they themselves were already choosing a microlearning approach for things they wanted to learn themselves. And in this case, were they already using a short online lesson in preference to a face-to-face seminar? So I found this public domain stock art, and I think it's nice. It illustrates the concept of online lessons, but it's busy. There's that cute little cat, there's some plants, a lot of stuff that kind of draws the eye away and distracts from the task at hand, which is to think about whether they use online learning lessons or prefer them. We want to reduce the visual clutter and not distract the learner from it. So that was a simple crop to make a cleaner, more efficient image, better conveys the ideas that we want. And especially important use of the crop tool is to remove things that are more than just extraneous, but could actually dilute or confuse the message. So in this one, we were talking about polling. We want to use the image to complement the idea that of the kind of questions that are available to us in polling. And I like those little wooden people. They're cute. They're nicely generic. But the only idea I wanted to talk about in this slide was that polling is a way to get opinions from a large group of people. But you look at this dynamic here, there's two people talking to a bigger group of people. And so that's maybe not the scenario. I just want to talk about getting the opinions of a large number of people. So I crop it. And now the image is just what I'm talking about. And sometimes an image is good, but it's so dense you can make 2 or even 3 images out of it. And that lets you break down your slide and pace your information better than trying to jam too much onto one of it. So I want to talk about pros and cons. This image is not bad, but if you crop it into one slide where you talk about your pros, and then you copy it again, you crop it again to talk about your cons, then you've paced your information better and you've made your images simple and more direct as well. Now let's go back to Mike's graphic of the 3 regions of the pharynx. Let's say in this example, we also want to talk about how the oropharynx relates to the pharynx. So that arrow, like you showed before, we could also use the crop tool to create a second image from a duplicate of the first that would zoom in once we've talked about the pharynx as a whole. So that's another way you could do that. Here we can really clearly see that item now. Labeling helps learners quickly understand what the image is meant to portray. When you label, you need to use fonts that are large enough to see. You need to make them clear and bold, easy to read colors. and you put them close to what you're referencing. This is called the spatial contiguity principle. And that says that students are going to learn better when the corresponding words and pictures are presented near rather than far from each other on the screen. So here's another image and slide that could use a little bit of work to become a whole lot better. There's too much information. This could be more than one slide. The labels are small. They're not very readable, and they not often as close enough to what they're referring as possible. Often we see people want to have all the content in the slide for people to read it. But remember, you have the notes panel. So if you want to have a cleaner slide, put that extra information in the notes panel, and it's still available to you. It's available to anybody you share the slide deck with afterwards, but your slide is not cognitive overloading people anymore. So we just simply put the information in the notes, and then we could expand our image, and that would make it a little better, but it's still got some of those issues I mentioned about the labels, and color black for those lines is also hard to see against the suit, in addition to the labels being small and hard to read and distant from what they're referring. Here, we've used Photoshop to take the lines away from the astronaut. But then we put it back into Google Slides, and we redid the captions so that they're bigger font, and we made better lines. In this case, we used a subtle trick. We did rectangles with white outlines, so they're very clear against the suit, and you can see exactly where they're pointed to. Now, if I was talking about these individual elements, I might also add some animation so that they appeared as I talked about them. One last technique is about using more than one of these elements we've discussed. In this example we've created, there's initially only text on the bottom here to tell the learners how to find a fictional room G1342. But we could show them visually by putting an outline, and that'll be helpful. You could also put in an arrow to make it even more obvious, and even a label. And all these things help the student process this image much more quickly. So remember that you have access to all these tools in both PowerPoint and Google Slides, and you can use them however you see best fits your message and reduce cognitive overload. When you cannot find images that were in the public domain and you might not have time to work with a graphics professional, you might consider using Gemini. And now Brandon will give you some quick tips on how you can use that.
So while AI is advancing at a pretty profound rate, it's still not going to take over and do everything for you. And so they've been evolving really quick, but your expertise remains the vital ingredient. So success isn't really found in the technology itself, but more in the ability to be able to direct it towards a specific intentional outcome. When you're working with Gemini, you want to think of yourself as the director, and Gemini is more of your production team. So instead of losing hours to sourcing and licensing and manually drafting specific visuals for every lecture point, you can now delegate the heavy lifting. Gemini handles the execution, so you can focus on the vision, dramatically increasing your efficiency without compromising on detail. So while Gemini has incredible potential, I do want to point out a critical foundational caution on ethical use in our environment. And when I'm talking about ethical use, we're talking about two main meanings here. And first means clinical responsibility, never presenting an AI-generated image as a fact without verification. And second, it means responsible content creation, using AI to create appropriate, respectful, and pedagogically sound materials that enhance, not compromise the learning environment. So we can generate beautiful and fairly accurate visuals like this image of a heart. But remember, this is only an extrapolation engine. So it's not a medical textbook, and it can and it often will introduce subtle, clinically significant errors. At first glance, you might think, wow, that's a pretty nice model of a heart. But upon closer examination, you'll see elements that really are quite wrong on there. So very important. Never deploy an AI-generated medical illustration without expert review and verification and editorial oversight. So now that I've kind of pounded that in, let's look at where this truly shines. So if we can't fully trust these images for microscopic accuracy, what can we do it? Or what can we trust it for? And the answer is style and mood and conceptual communication. So if we take this heart model, it's detailed, but it's flawed for teaching anatomy. But what if we took that same digital model and repurpose it and add a prompt like create a stylized, highly complex graphic slide background in the area of cardiac medicine and add the title across the middle in bold, and you can say that. And we can get a very nicely styled background image from module title page. Still using that heart, a similar heart model, not quite the same one. But at this point, the details kind of become irrelevant, but the professional aesthetic remains. So Gemini is like really good at creating abstract and conceptual and mood setting visuals that are related to your topic without needing absolute clinical accuracy. So use Gemini to elevate your slide decks and keep them engaging and, add a little bit of visual interest. So let's take a look at this example here. How many times have you needed a quick diagram for a lecture and you kind of sketched it out on a whiteboard or a tablet and then struggled for, an hour or so trying to clean it up and make it look professional? I drew this on a note card just sitting on my desk. It took really a few seconds, and then I took a picture of it with my phone, emailed it to myself, copied it into Gemini, and then I used this prompt that says, turn this into a slick 2D infographic using professional color palette and fonts. And this is where Gemini really becomes an instant drafting assistant. So my goal here was to take this ugly sketch and try to make something about atmospheric pressure look nice, like a print-ready graphic. So we went from the rough idea to a professional-looking asset here in literally seconds. So this capability eliminates the need to really learn expensive vector software or go out and try to find a pre-made diagram that is almost right but doesn't quite fit your needs. You can sketch the idea and AI will handle the rest. Now, this wasn't exactly what I wanted, so I asked Gemini to modify it slightly. I said, recreate this with only one vertical tube, because in the sketch I only had the one. And it fixed it right away. Got rid of the extra text that was in there, which I can always go back into PowerPoint or Google Slides and add back in. But it turned out pretty nice in a matter of seconds. So one more example. This is where it really kind of gets to the creative power of Gemini, and we're moving beyond simple cleanup and into deep conversational modification here. So again, I started with a completely non-medical, utterly simple sketch, stick figure walking the dog. And again, I did it on paper, took a picture, put it into Gemini, and I asked Gemini to turn this into a 2D illustration. And it changed our stick figure into a nicer version of a nondescript figure, but I wanted it to look just a little bit nicer. So I added this prompt. So now take that composition, transform it into a fully illustrated children's book illustration. And this is what I got. Now here's the magic. I didn't hit undo or I didn't create a new prompt. I just simply told the AI, take this and change this and turn it into this. And what it does, it has created an entirely different mood, entirely different image, which is pretty slick for what you need. So now one more trick here, turn this into like a more cinematic, ultra realistic photograph with the Halloween theme. Now, it didn't exactly make it photorealistic, but it totally changed it into a Halloween theme, complete with Halloween elements, a mood. It changed it to nighttime with your full moon, and you've got the pumpkins and everything else. But I just want to say that the key takeaway for this as medical educators is you can use any image as a starting point for any variation. You just need to show, let's say you wanted to show a healthy patient and then transform that patient into a sick or vice versa patient. You could do that. If you need to change like a medical device from model A to model B, you can do that. You create the initial scene and then you use your text prompts to sculpt it into exactly what you need. And this capability is the very definition of visual efficiency. So as I mentioned earlier, you have to guide Gemini to get the image that you're looking for. The more detail you can provide, the more likely you are to get your final image. The only limitation really is your time and patience, because Gemini gives you unlimited iterations. And some important details to include when you create your prompts are, what style do you want to use? If you're not quite sure what it's called, if you browse the web and you find some graphics that are similar to what you're looking for, you can type that in, give Gemini the URL, and ask it, what style of artwork is this? And that'll help lead you into, maybe what you're looking for. Subject obviously is very important. You have to tell it what you're trying to imagine. And then the context can be helpful descriptor as well, to kind of direct who the final output may be geared towards. So here's an example of the previous slide that I just did. I just chose in Google Slides, there's when you put an image into Google Slides, there's a little button at the bottom that says beautify the slide. And I clicked it to see what it would do, and it came up with this as a redesign for my slide. Now, very importantly, like I mentioned before, Gemini is not perfect, and it does make mistakes, and it does create errors. And you can see on the screen how it has the word include in there twice. The font's totally different from my presentation font. I could go through and give Gemini further directions to modify this even more. But it's up to you to continue taking it where you want it to go. So let's summarize kind of the Gemini wrap up here. The first rule of Gemini Club, and you can actually talk about this, is Gemini is your co-pilot, not the clinician. So use the output for speed, but always apply your own expertise. Never skip the expert review part on clinically specific details. So we talked about 2 valuable uses that are completely safe and instantly elevate your material. Use the AI to generate conceptual art to give your presentations a professional polish. And use it to clean up and refine your rough sketches into high-quality diagrams. And finally, embrace the power of iteration. I mean, the real magic isn't in the first image it creates. It's in the ability to use text prompts to sculpt that image over and over again until you get exactly what you want. So start simple, sketch a concept, have Gemini polish it, and then, iterate it, modify it. And as I transition over to the next segment, full disclosure, this image was not created entirely in Gemini. I did have to do some work in Photoshop using some of the tools that Mr. Gallagher is going to talk about right now. So with that, Mr. Gallagher, Mike, take it away.
Thank you, Brandon. My name is Mike Gallagher, and I'm going to talk to you about some useful smart tools for image enhancement in Photoshop. I'm going to start with an overview of this portion of the presentation. Today, I'm going to showcase Photoshop smart tools that can be used to clean up, alter, or improve your images. These tools include the Repair tool, which helps repair images or remove unwanted parts of an image, the Smart Selection tool, which makes selecting objects in an image easy, allowing you to isolate them and work with them exclusively, the Generative Fill tool, which helps expand canvases or parts of an image, generating new information where it is missing. As a heads up to our audience members, there are a few prerequisites for the following along. To best understand the use of these tools, I'm going to talk about requires some basic familiarity or experience with Photoshop. This includes opening and creating a file, familiarity with tools in the interface, and familiarity of working with layers. Photoshop Smart Tools are useful for images that need to be altered, modified, remixed, and reused in whatever manner you plan to use them, whether it's publication, presentation, or for educational purposes. Before you modify an image, be sure that they meet requirements under one of the following groups or types. These are personal images, and these are images that are created or owned by you. If you have people in your image, they should be aware of how you will be using the image and sign off on its use. There's also Creative Commons images, Creative Commons has a number of licenses for each images or license types, each of which lets you use images for different purposes and with varying needs for attribution. Go to the Creative Commons website to find out more about the licenses and attributions. The image of the heart shown here has a Creative Commons attribution license, which means I need to cite the original creator. I'm also allowed to share and adapt it as I like. Public domain. These images can be used or manipulated in any manner for any use, usually without credit. When using a public domain image, be sure that the website it comes from cites the image as copyright free. This is because sometimes elements of images may be copyrighted and attribution may be required, even on places like government websites. Other types of images. Well, these are images that can be altered or modified, although restrictions may vary. This is sometimes allowed from publishers or owners, and this is often by request, but requires permission and most likely includes attribution or credit of the source. Now a short video giving you an overview of these smart tools in Photoshop and some examples of how they can be used.
Have you ever found yourself with an image you like, but it had too many distracting graphic elements like text and labels? This image here from the NCI I like, but I want to remove the graphic elements and have just the image by itself. There are two tools in Photoshop that can help in this situation. The Remove tool is an AI or generative tool that can automatically remove things like lines by using the wiring cable function. Or you can paint over the areas you'd like remove. A resizable brush paints over unwanted parts of the image shown here in pink. Once I've painted the elements to be removed, a simple click of the button generates a fill for the painted pink areas, removing those graphic elements. The pros of this tool are its ability to create largely seamless fills. The downside is the time it might take to generate these fills. The second tool that can give similar results a little faster is the Spot Healing Brush tool. Like the Remove tool, this is applied by brushing over what you are trying to remove. The brush sizes are also adjustable, and you can see here that I'm painting in a transparent black. One big difference with the Spot Healing Brush tool is as soon as I stop painting, the fill is created instantly. The pros of this tool are the speed in which it operates. The cons are it's a little sloppy when compared to the results of the Remove tool. These tools can be used in other ways, removing elements other than the text and line, such as these platelets and blood cells. I recommend playing with both tools to see which best suits your needs. Smart Selection tool is used for precise, fast, and simple selection of subjects or objects in images. Have you ever found an image you liked, but you're not too happy with the background? Or maybe you want just a single element from an image. In the past, you may have spent a lot of time tracing an object with your mouse, but now Photoshop has smart selection tools to help make object selection simple and painless. The first option I'm going to show for smart selection is the most straightforward way, using subject selection from the drop-down menu. This method is perfect for when you have a subject that is easily identified, such as this image of a vertebra. Using Smart Selection, Subject is selected from the drop-down menu, and after a few seconds, your object is automatically selected. With Object selected, you can copy and paste it into a new document, allowing you to easily change the background color or manipulate the object as needed. This selection method sometimes does not work so well on images with multiple objects or elements that aren't so well defined. This is true of the next example, the image of the heart with the blood vessels. Imagine in this case that all I want is an image of the heart. The Object Selection tool is a smart selection tool very useful for isolating elements within more complex images. This tool automatically selects individual elements for you just by hovering over the object to select it. The selection preview turns the element pink, and then you click on the pink to select it. Now you can copy and paste it into a new document and make any changes as needed. Generative Fill is an AI-powered smart tool that allows users to add, remove, or extend content in images. It can also incorporate text prompts to achieve realistic or accurate results. There are numerous applications of Generative Fill, but the example I'm going to show is how to seamlessly expand an image background. Imagine an image that has a background you like, but you're not happy with where the image ends. It's a little small and would be better if it were wider, in order to add labels or notations. One way to extend the background is to use Generative Fill. You can start by extending the canvas with the crop tool as shown here. Then all you need to do is select the empty white area and fill the selected space using Generative Fill from the drop-down menu. When selected, AI will analyze the image and do a smart fill to the extended area. No text prompt is needed. For the blue background, this is a fairly simple task. Now your image is ready for your presentation. This tool is especially useful when used with images that have more complex backgrounds, like trees or a skyline.
So in order of appearance, the credits for the image as determined by their licensing from Creative Commons and otherwise.
We hope you've been inspired by what we've shared to make more and better images using PowerPoint or slides, Google Gemini, and Photoshop.
Thank you for watching today's Teaching with Technology Brown Bag. You can view all Teaching with Technology Brown Bags on the USU YouTube channel under the full ETI playlist. Have a nice day.